On the night of October 14th, Julian Thorne was the envy of New York City. As the CEO of Etheria, he was worth $14 billion, standing on the steps of the Met with his stunning wife, Elena, on his arm. The cameras flashed, capturing what looked like the perfect American power couple. But look closely at the footage, and you'll see it. The moment Elena's eyes went cold. At 11:02 p.m., she excused herself to powder her nose. She never came back. By the time the sun rose over Central Park, Julian Thorne hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost his company, his fortune, and his freedom. This isn't just a disappearance. It's a masterclass in revenge. The air inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the distinct metallic tang of old money. It was the annual Obsidian Gala, the most exclusive event on the Manhattan social calendar. A single ticket cost $75,000, but for men like Julian Thorne, cost was an abstract concept. Julian stood near the Temple of Dender, swirling a glass of 1959 Dom Perignon. He was 42, with the jawline of a movie star and the cold, calculating eyes of a shark. He was the founder of Etheria, a data mining conglomerate that had recently secured a defense contract with the Pentagon worth billions. He was, by all accounts, the king of the city. Standing beside him was Elena. In a room full of peacocks, she was a swan, silent, graceful, and dressed in a vintage black velvet gown that seemed to absorb the light around her. She was wearing the Thorne diamond, a 40-carat yellow diamond necklace that Julian had bought at Christie's the year prior for $12 million. It was a collar, really. A very expensive collar. "Smile, darling," Julian whispered, his voice low and devoid of affection, though his face maintained a practiced grin for the photographer from Vanity Fair. "The senator is looking over here. Don't look so vacant." Elena blinked. It was the only sign she had heard him. "I have a headache, Julian. The lights are intense tonight." "It's a gala, Elena. The lights are the point," he snapped quietly, gripping her elbow just tight enough to be uncomfortable, but loose enough to leave no bruise. "Just get through the speech. Then you can go home and pop a Xanax." This was the dynamic of the Thorne marriage. To the public, they were a fairy tale. Elena was the charity darling, the woman who sat on the boards of hospitals and libraries. Julian was the titan of industry. Behind the heavy oak doors of their triplex penthouse on 57th Street, however, the reality was starkly different. Elena was a prop, a beautiful object Julian curated, much like the art on the walls. At 10:45 p.m., the chiming of a glass signaled the start of the speeches. Julian was set to announce a new philanthropic initiative, a tax write-off disguised as charity. He stepped onto the podium, the spotlight hitting him. He loved this, the adoration, the power. Elena stood in the shadows of the Egyptian wing. She watched him speak, her face unreadable. A waiter passed by with a tray of empty flutes. She caught his eye. It wasn't a flirtatious look. It was a signal, a micro-expression so fleeting that only a trained intelligence officer would have caught it. The waiter gave a barely perceptible nod and moved toward the service exit. At 10:58 p.m., Julian was wrapping up. "And to my beautiful wife, Elena, who is my anchor." He gestured to where she had been standing. The spot was empty. A ripple of confused laughter moved through the crowd. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Ah, it seems my anchor has drifted off to the ladies' room. She never was one for the spotlight." The crowd laughed. Julian stepped down, shaking hands, accepting praise. But a knot of irritation tightened in his stomach. Elena knew the drill. She was supposed to be there for the applause. It was part of the contract, unspoken but understood. At 11:15 p.m., Julian checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, one of only 7 in the world. 15 minutes. That was too long. He signaled to his head of security, a massive former Navy SEAL named Marcus Cole. "Go find her," Julian murmured, sipping his champagne. "Tell her if she's sick, we'll leave, but she needs to come out now." Cole nodded and spoke into his wrist mic. 10 minutes later, Cole returned. His face, usually a mask of stoic professionalism, was pale. "Mr. Thorne," Cole whispered, leaning in close. "She's not in the ladies' room. Check the terrace. She probably went for a smoke. We checked the terrace. We checked the exits. We checked the CCTV, sir." Julian turned, his eyes narrowing. "And?" "The cameras in the East Wing. They looped, sir, from 10:55 p.m. to 11:05 p.m. Just 10 minutes of static footage." Julian felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. Etheria specialized in surveillance. His home was a fortress. His life was monitored for the cameras at the Met during the highest security event of the year. To loop? That wasn't a glitch. That was a professional job. "Get the car," Julian hissed, abandoning his glass on a priceless ancient sandstone plinth. "Now." As Julian stormed out of the Met, pushing past confused socialites and paparazzi, he pulled out his phone to track Elena. They had a shared location app, a non-negotiable condition of their marriage. He opened the app. Elena's location, no signal. He tried to call her. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." Not turned off, not out of range, no longer in service. Julian sat in the back of his armored Maybach, his thumbs flying across the screen. He wasn't worried about her safety yet. He was worried about the optics. If she had been kidnapped, the stock price would wobble. If she had left him... No, that was impossible. She had no money. He controlled her accounts. He controlled her passport. She didn't even have the code to the front door of their apartment. "Take me to the office," Julian ordered the driver. "Sir?" Cole asked from the front seat. "Shouldn't we go home? The police." "No police yet," Julian roared. "If this gets out, the board will panic. Take me to the server room. I need to track her car's GPS manually." The Maybach tore down Fifth Avenue. The city lights blurred outside the window, a streak of gold and red. Julian Thorne didn't know it yet, but the Gala was the last time he would ever be a free man. The woman he called his wife had just initiated a sequence of events that had been 5 years in the making. Elena wasn't missing. She was simply executing the program. The headquarters of Etheria Systems was a 60-story monolith of black glass in the financial district. It was designed to look intimidating, a physical manifestation of the data it held. Julian marched through the lobby at 11:55 p.m., his security detail trailing him. The night shift guards jumped to attention, surprised to see the CEO still in his tuxedo, looking disheveled and frantic. "Unlock the master terminal," Julian barked as he entered his office on the top floor. His personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah who seemed to live at her desk, looked up in terror. "Mr. Thorne, is everything okay?" "Just do it, Sarah." He pushed past her and sat at his massive obsidian desk. He needed to access the God's Eye protocol. It was a piece of software Etheria had developed for government use. It could piggyback on traffic cameras, ATM cameras, and private security feeds to track a face anywhere in the city. It was illegal for private use, but Julian used it whenever he pleased. He typed in his biometric key. "Access denied." Julian froze. He retyped it. "Access denied. Biosignature mismatch." "What the hell?" He slammed his hand on the desk. "Sarah, why am I locked out of my own system?" Sarah rushed in, typing on her tablet. I don't know, sir. The system says your credentials were revoked. Revoked? By whom? I am the majority shareholder. By the administrator, Sarah stammered, looking at the logs. I am the administrator, Julian screamed. Not anymore, a voice said from the doorway. Julian spun around. It wasn't Eleanor. It was his CFO, Arthur Pym. Pym was a small, nervous man who usually sweated through his suits. Tonight, however, he looked strangely calm. He was holding a file folder. Arthur, fix this, Julian commanded. Someone hacked the system. I need to find Eleanor. Eleanor isn't lost, Julian, Arthur said softly. He walked into the room and placed the folder on the desk. She's merely unavailable. Julian stared at him. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. What did you just say? She came to see me, Julian, 3 months ago. Julian laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. Elena? Elena can barely balance a checkbook. What did she come to see you for? Charity donations? No, Arthur corrected. She came to discuss the shell companies, the ones in the Caymans, the ones you use to launder the bribes from the defense contractors. The blood drained from Julian's face. You're fired. Get out. I'll have you killed. You can't fire me, Arthur said, checking his watch. It was midnight. Because as of 12:07 a.m., Etheria Systems has filed for emergency Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. What? Julian stood up, knocking his chair over. We have $4 billion in liquid cash. Arthur shook his head. We had $4 billion. At 11:15 p.m., right around the time your wife disappeared, a series of automated transfers were authorized. They utilized the override codes that only you possess. I didn't authorize anything. No, Arthur agreed, but the system thinks you did. The biometrics matched. The retinal scan matched. The voice print matched. Julian's mind raced. How? How could she? The contact lenses. 2 weeks ago, Elena had surprised him with a gift. New smart glasses for his work. She had insisted he try them on, calibrate them. She must have recorded his retinal data. And the voice? She recorded him constantly, claiming she wanted to save memories. Where is the money, Arthur? Julian whispered. Gone, Arthur said. Dispersed into 4,000 micro-accounts across 3 continents. It's untraceable. But that's not the worst part. Arthur opened the folder. Inside were photos. Photos of Julian meeting with sanctioned foreign officials. Photos of Julian with underage girls on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Photos Julian thought he had destroyed years ago. Elena didn't just take the money, Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly now, realizing the magnitude of what he had helped do. She took the black ledger, the encrypted drive you kept in the safe at the penthouse. The safe requires a thumbprint, Julian said, his voice barely audible. Yes, Arthur said. Did you ever wonder why she held your hand so tightly during movies? Or why she was so obsessed with that molding clay hobby last month? Julian collapsed onto the sofa. The magnitude of the betrayal was physical. It felt like a blow to the chest. Why are you telling me this? Julian asked. You're an accomplice. You'll go to jail too. No, Arthur said. I turned state's witness yesterday. Immunity. In exchange for my testimony against you. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder. Red and blue lights flashed against the glass walls of the office, reflecting off the night sky. She left you something, Arthur said, pointing to Julian's computer. Check your personal email. She said the password is the date you killed her brother. Julian froze. He scrambled to the keyboard. He typed in a date, 09/12/2018. The screen unlocked. A single video file sat in the inbox. The subject line read, Checkmate. Julian clicked play. The video showed Eleanor, She wasn't wearing the designer gown or the diamonds. She was wearing a simple hoodie, sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes clear, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent. "Hello, Julian," the Elena on the screen said. "If you're watching this, I'm already out of US airspace. You probably think this is about the money, or the affairs, or the abuse." She leaned in closer to the camera. "But we both know what this is really about. You thought Silas committed suicide. You thought you cleaned up the mess when he threatened to expose your faulty guidance systems. You pushed him off that roof." Julian's hands were shaking so hard he could barely breathe. "You took my brother," Elena whispered. "So I took your life. I didn't want a divorce, Julian. I wanted to leave you with nothing. No money, no company, no reputation." On the screen, Elena smiled. It was a smile he had never seen before, predatory and triumphant. "The police are downstairs, Julian. They have the Black Ledger. I emailed it to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times 5 minutes ago. Enjoy the Gala aftermath." The video ended. The elevator doors pinged open. Detective Marcus Sterling walked in, flanked by 4 uniformed officers and 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. Sterling was a man who looked like he had seen too much darkness, and right now he was looking at Julian like he was a stain on the floor. "Julian Thorne," Sterling announced, holding up a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and the murder of Silas Vance." Julian looked at the window. He looked at the empty champagne glass on his desk. He looked at Arthur Pym, who looked away. "She planned it," Julian whispered. "She planned it all." "You have the right to remain silent," Sterling said, snapping the cuffs onto Julian's wrists, the same wrists that had worn a $200,000 watch just an hour ago. "She's gone," Julian laughed, a manic, broken sound. "She vanished without a word." "Oh, she left plenty of words, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, pushing him toward the elevator. "She left terabytes of them." As they marched Julian out of his own tower, the news tickers in Times Square were already changing. Breaking news. Billionaire Julian Thorne arrested. Etheria Systems collapses. Wife missing. But Eleanor wasn't missing. She was just beginning. For Julian Thorne, the fall from grace wasn't a slide. It was a cliff dive. 48 hours after the Obsidian Gala, the man who had dined with presidents was sitting in an interrogation room at the 19th Precinct in Manhattan. The room smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, a stark contrast to the amber and sandalwood scent of his penthouse. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers, though the jacket had been taken as evidence, and his custom dress shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. Across the metal table sat Detective Marcus Sterling and FBI Special Agent Eliza Reynolds. Reynolds was the lead on the financial crimes. Sterling was the homicide detective looking into the disappearance of Eleanor and the cold case of Silas Vance. "My lawyer," Julian croaked. His throat was dry. He hadn't slept in 2 days. "Where is Harrison?" "Harrison Ford is a great actor," Sterling quipped dryly. "Harrison Wells, your attorney. He's currently trying to explain to a judge why you shouldn't be held without bail. Given that you have, or had, access to private jets and offshore accounts, the judge isn't looking favorable." Agent Reynolds slid a tablet across the table. "We're not here to talk about your bail, Mr. Thorne. We're here to talk about the dead man's switch your wife activated." On the screen was a bank statement. It was from the Banque Privée Edmond de Rothschild in Geneva. "This is your primary holding account for Etheria's black budget, correct?" Reynolds asked. Julian remained silent. "It's empty," Reynolds continued. "But the transaction log is fascinating. The money didn't just disappear. It was donated, All of it. Julian's eyes widened. Donated. $4 billion, Reynolds said, her voice devoid of sympathy. Split between 300 non-profits. The Silas Vance Foundation for Whistleblower Protection, the Global Fund for Victims of Corporate Negligence, orphanages in Sudan, clean water initiatives in Flint. By the time we froze the assets, the money was already being spent. It's gone, Julian. You can't claw back $4 billion from hungry children. Julian put his head in his hands. It wasn't just theft. It was humiliation. She hadn't stolen the money to get rich. She had stolen it to make him a saint against his will, using the blood money he had killed for. "Where is she?" Julian whispered. "We were hoping you could tell us," Sterling said, leaning in. "Because we searched the penthouse." The search of the Thorne residence had been a spectacle. Flashbulbs popped as CSI teams carried out boxes. But what they found inside, or rather, what they didn't find, painted a disturbing picture. "We found a hidden compartment in her vanity," Sterling said. "Do you know what was inside?" Julian looked up. He didn't know. He thought he knew everything about her. "Journals," Sterling said. 5 years of journals, handwritten. He opened an evidence bag and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. He began to read. October 14th, 2021. He hit me again today. Not on the face. He knows the gala is coming up. He hit me in the ribs. He told me if I ever tried to leave, he'd kill me like he killed my brother. I'm so scared. I have to play the part. I have to be the perfect wife. If I smile, maybe he won't hurt me tonight. "Lies!" Julian screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "I never touched her. I never hit her." "We have medical records, Julian," Reynolds said calmly. "From a private clinic in Westchester. X-rays of fractured ribs. Bruising consistent with defensive wounds. She documented everything." Julian stared at them, his mouth agape. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The headaches, the trips to the spa. She had been planting evidence. For years. She had been visiting doctors, faking injuries, or perhaps inflicting them on herself, to create a paper trail of abuse that didn't exist. "She framed me," Julian gasped. "She's a psychopath." "Or," Sterling said, "she's a victim who finally snapped. The narrative out there? In the press? You're the monster, Julian." "Justice. For Elena is trending worldwide. People are burning Etheria products in the streets." The door opened, and a uniformed officer poked his head in. "Detective, we got a hit on the passport." Julian sat up straighter. "Where?" Reynolds demanded. "Heathrow, London. She just passed through customs." Sterling stood up immediately. "Contact Scotland Yard. Have them lock down the terminal." As the detectives rushed out, leaving Julian alone in the cold, grey room, a small smile touched the corner of Julian's mouth. London. She had slipped up. London was the most surveilled city in the world. If she was there, he could find her. And when he found her, he would kill her himself. But Julian was wrong. At that exact moment, 3,000 miles away, a woman with short, dyed blonde hair and coloured contacts was walking out of a train station in a small coastal town in Patagonia, Chile. She threw a burner phone into a trash can. The passport in London? A decoy. A woman she had hired on the dark web. A lookalike paid $50,000 to fly from New York to London using Elena's old passport to draw the FBI's gaze across the Atlantic. Elena, real name Clara, took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. She checked her watch. It was a cheap Casio. She loved it. Phase 1 was complete. Destruction. Phase 2 was beginning. Erasure. Back in New York, the media frenzy was reaching a fever pitch. The New York Post ran the headline, "Gala Gone Girl," But the real story wasn't on the front page. It was in the past. To understand how a woman disappears into thin air, you have to understand how she appeared in the first place. 5 years ago, Elena Thorne did not exist. The woman who would become her was named Clara Vance. She was 26, a doctoral student in art history at Columbia University. She wore oversized glasses, knitted her own sweaters, and lived in a studio apartment in Queens with her older brother, Silas. Silas was everything to her. Their parents had died when Clara was 10, and Silas had raised her. He was a brilliant coder, a prodigy who had been headhunted by Etheria Systems to work on their new guidance chips. Then came the night of September 12th. Clara came home to find the apartment door unlocked. Silas was gone. His laptop was gone. 3 hours later, the police knocked. They found Silas's body on the pavement below the Etheria headquarters. Ruled a suicide. Workplace stress, the coroner said. Clara knew it was a lie. 2 days prior, Silas had told her, "I found something, Clara. The chips. They're failing the safety tests. But Julian Thorne is shipping them anyway. He's bribing the inspectors. If these go into planes, people will die. I'm going to confront him." Clara tried to go to the police. She was laughed out of the precinct. Etheria's lawyers descended on her with NDAs and cease and desist orders. They buried her in legal threats until she was too broke to fight. She stood at Silas's grave on a rainy Tuesday. There was no one else there. Just her and the wet earth. "I won't sue them, Silas," she whispered to the headstone. "A lawsuit is a transaction. I don't want their money. I want their life." That day, Clara Vance died. She spent the insurance money not on rent, but on a transformation. She dropped out of Columbia. She moved to a grim apartment in New Jersey where no one knew her. She began to study Julian Thorne like a thesis project. She watched every interview he had ever given. She analyzed his gaze. He liked women who were elegant, but submissive. Women who were cultured, but not louder than him. He had a weakness for classical music and the Renaissance period. He hated desperate women. He wanted a challenge, but a conquerable one. She spent 6 months changing her physical appearance. She starved herself to lose 20 pounds, achieving the heroin chic look Julian favored. She dyed her hair from a mousy brown to a striking raven black. She took voice lessons to lower her pitch, smoothing out her Queen's accent into a transatlantic lilt that suggested boarding schools in Switzerland. She changed her name legally to Elena Vesper. She forged a background, orphaned daughter of a minor French diplomat, educated in Europe, working as a freelance art consultant. It was vague enough to be hard to check, but specific enough to sound elite. Then, she set the trap. She knew Julian attended Art Basel in Miami every December. It was his hunting ground for both investments and mistresses. Elena spent her last $10,000 on a VIP pass and a white Dior dress. She spotted him on the second day, standing in front of a Rothko, looking bored. A gaggle of models were trying to get his attention, laughing too loudly at his jokes. Julian looked miserable. Eleanor didn't approach him. She stood 10 feet away, staring at the same painting, her expression one of mild disgust. Julian noticed her. He noticed that she wasn't looking at him. He walked over. "You don't like the Rothko?" Elena didn't turn to face him immediately. She waited 3 seconds, a psychological trick to establish dominance. Then she turned, her eyes cool. "It's derivative. This is from his Depression era, but it lacks the visceral anger of his earlier work. It's just sad. Rich people buy it to feel deep, but they just end up with a very expensive red square." Julian blinked. He laughed, a genuine sound. "I'm Julian." "I know," Elena said simply. She turned back to the painting. "I'm Elena." She walked away. She didn't give him her number. She left the gallery. It was the hook. Julian Thorne was a man who could have anything he wanted. The moment she walked away, he became obsessed. He hunted her down. He sent flowers to the gallery she claimed to consult for. He invited her to dinner. She declined the first 2 invitations. She accepted the third. On their first date, she let him do 80% of the talking. She mirrored his body language. When he leaned in, she leaned in. When he drank, she drank. She made him feel like he was the most fascinating man in the world, not by complimenting him, but by listening with an intensity that felt like intimacy. 6 months later, he proposed. She accepted, but with hesitation. "I don't care about your money, Julian," she had told him, eyes wide with fake sincerity. "I'm afraid the lifestyle, it will change us." "It won't," he promised. "I'll take care of you." The wedding was the social event of the season. As she walked down the aisle, wearing a $100,000 Vera Wang dress, Clara Vance looked at the man waiting at the altar. She didn't see a husband. She saw a target. The night of the honeymoon, while Julian slept in their suite in the Maldives, Elena sat on the balcony. She opened her laptop. She inserted a small USB drive she had stolen from his briefcase while he was in the shower. She began to copy the files. For 4 years, she played the long game. She endured his temper. She endured his coldness. She played the trophy wife perfectly. She organized his galas. She charmed his investors. And every night, while he slept, she was awake. She learned his passwords. She learned where the bodies were buried, metaphorically and literally. She found the proof of Silas's murder in a deleted email archive he thought was scrubbed. She slowly moved assets. She set up the shell companies for the donations. She planted the diary entries. She staged the medical records. It was exhausted work. Hating someone that much takes energy. But the hardest part wasn't the hacking. It was the acting. It was letting him touch her. It was saying, "I love you," to the man who killed her brother. But she did it. She did it for Silas. And now, 5 years later, sitting in that cabin in Patagonia, Elena Vesper was dead. Clara Vance was dead. She looked in the mirror of the cabin. She took a pair of scissors and began to cut the blonde wig. "Now," she whispered to her reflection, "who shall I be next?" She picked up a map of the world. Julian was in jail, but the system was corrupt. He might get out. He had powerful friends. If he got out, he would come for her. She was counting on it, because she hadn't just stolen his money. She had kept one thing for herself, one piece of leverage that ensured he would chase her to the ends of the earth. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. Inside was the Thorne diamond, the 40-carat yellow diamond she had worn to the gala. It wasn't just a necklace. On the back of the setting, laser-inscribed in microscopic text, were the launch codes for Etheria's government defense satellites. She held the diamond up to the light. It fractured the sun into 1,000 rainbows. "Come and find me, darling," she said. The Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Lower Manhattan, is often described as Guantanamo North. For Julian Thorne, who was used to 1,000-thread-count sheets and chefs who specialized in molecular gastronomy, the 6x8 concrete cell was less a room and more a tomb. It had been 1 week since his arrest. The media storm outside was relentless. Every news channel was running 24/7 coverage of the fall of the House of Thorne. But inside the MCC, Julian was dealing with a different kind of pressure. At 10:10 a.m., the heavy steel door buzzed open. "Legal visit," the guard grunted. Julian was shackled, and marched down a sterile hallway to a small, soundproofed room. He expected to see Harrison Wells, his frantic attorney who was currently drowning in discovery paperwork. Instead, sitting at the metal table was a man Julian hadn't seen in 3 years. Senator Elias Corvus did not look like he belonged in a prison. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, and his silver hair was coiffed to perfection. Corvus was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was also the silent partner who had ensured Etheria won the Pentagon contracts. Julian sat down, the chains rattling. "You shouldn't be here, Elias. It's bad optics." "Optics are the least of my concerns, Julian," Corvus said, his voice smooth and cold as liquid nitrogen. "Do you know what happened this morning? The Pentagon suspended the Etheria contract. The stock is trading at 40 cents. You are toxic." "I can fix it," Julian said, leaning forward. "I just need bail. I need to get to my servers." "There is no fixing this," Corvus interrupted. "The board met last night. We are cutting you loose. You're going to be the fall guy, Julian. You'll plead guilty to all charges. Embezzlement, fraud, the murder of the Vance boy. You'll take 2 life sentences. In exchange, we won't have you shanked in the shower block before trial." Julian stared at the senator. The betrayal stung, but he had expected it. These men were sharks. They ate the wounded. "You can't cut me loose," Julian said softly. "Watch me." "No, really, Elias, you can't." Julian smiled. It was a terrifying expression, devoid of humor. "Because Elena didn't just take the money. She took the Thorn diamond." Corvus sighed, checking his cuticles. "It's a necklace, Julian. We can buy you a new one." "It's not jewelry," Julian hissed. "Think back, Elias. 3 years ago. The Project Sentinel encryption keys, the back doors to the drone guidance systems. You told me to hide them somewhere unhackable, somewhere offline." Corvus froze. His eyes snapped up to meet Julian's. "I had them laser-etched onto the pavilion of the diamond," Julian whispered. "Microlithography. Invisible to the naked eye. Elena is walking around with the master keys to the U.S. automated defense grid around her neck." The color drained from the senator's face. You put top-secret clearance codes on a necklace?" "I thought it was poetic," Julian sneered. "And safe. Who steals a wife's necklace without stealing the wife? I didn't count on the wife stealing herself." Corvus stood up, pacing the small room. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. If those codes got out, if Elena sold them to the Chinese, the Russians, or just leaked them to WikiLeaks, it wasn't just jail for Corvus. It was treason. It was the collapse of national security. "Does she know?" Corvus asked. "She's smart," Julian said, "but she's not a tech engineer. She took it for the money. She thinks it's just a 40-carat rock. She'll try to fence it. If she tries to sell it on the black market, she'll be spotted." "Exactly," Julian said. "But the FBI is incompetent. They want her for fraud. If they catch her, they'll book the necklace into evidence. If a lab tech looks at it under a microscope, game over, Elias. For both of us." Corvus stopped pacing. He leaned down, placing his hands on the table. The veneer of the civilized politician was gone. "What do you want, Julian?" "I want out," Julian said. "Arrange a transfer, medical furlough, house arrest. I don't care. Get me out of here and I will get the diamond back." "No," Corvus said. "You're too recognizable. You can't hunt her." "Then who?" Corvus pulled a burner phone from his pocket. He dialed a number and let it ring once before hanging up. "There is a man," Corvus said. "We used him in Benghazi. He doesn't have a name, but the file calls him Kane. He's a tracker. If she's on this planet, he will find her. And when he finds her, he retrieves the asset, Corvus said, buttoning his jacket. And he ties up the loose end. No, Julian said instinctively. I want her alive. I want to look her in the eye when I take everything back. Corvus looked at Julian with pity. You still love her. That's pathetic. She destroyed you, Julian. Kane has his orders. Recover the diamond. Eliminate the threat. Corvus knocked on the door for the guard. As he left, he didn't look back. Julian sat alone in the silence. He had just signed his wife's death warrant. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself it was justice. But as he looked at his shackled hands, he couldn't stop the memory of Eleanor's laugh on their wedding day. The one day he thought she might have actually loved him. The Shark Tank had just released a great white, and it was heading for Elena. Valparaiso, Chile, is a city of chaos and color. Houses painted in neon pinks and blues cling to the steep hillsides, and the funicular elevators groan as they haul tourists up and down the slopes. It is a place where it is easy to get lost. Elena, now going by the name Sophia, sat at a corner table in a crowded cafe, sipping strong coffee. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf wrapped around her head. To the casual observer, she was just another backpacker. But under the table her leg was bouncing nervously. She had felt it for 2 days, a prickle on the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. She had followed all her own rules. She paid in cash. She never stayed in the same hostel for more than 2 nights. She didn't use phones or internet cafes. She was a ghost. But someone was close. She glanced across the street. A man was standing by a fruit stand. He was tall, wearing a faded denim jacket and a baseball cap. He was buying an apple, but his body was angled toward her. He wasn't looking at the fruit. He was looking at her reflection in the shop window. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Police? No. Police came in pairs. They fidgeted. This man was perfectly still. Mercenary. Julian had found her, or rather, Julian's money had found her. She stood up, leaving a crumpled bill on the table, and walked briskly toward the Ascensor Artilleria, one of the old wooden elevators that connected the lower city to the hilltops. She needed to get to high ground. She paid the fare and squeezed into the wooden carriage. As the doors began to close, she saw the man in the denim jacket walking toward the entrance. He wasn't running. He was walking with a terrifying, measured pace. He knew he had her cornered. The elevator jolted and began to ascend. Elena looked out over the harbor, the shipping containers stacked like Lego bricks below. She reached into her bag and gripped the handle of a ceramic knife she had bought at a market. Metal detectors couldn't find it, but it was sharp enough to slice through steak or an artery. The elevator reached the top. Elena burst out, blending into a tour group of elderly Germans. She wove through the colorful alleyways of the Paseo 21 de Mayo. She turned a corner into a narrow alleyway, known for its street art. It was empty. Bad move. She spun around to backtrack, but he was there. The man stood at the entrance of the alley. Up close, he was older than she thought. His face was a map of scars, and his eyes were dead. This was Kane. "Mrs. Thorne," he said. His voice was gravel. "You're hard to find." Elena backed away. "I don't have the money. I donated it." "I don't care about the money," Kane said, taking a step forward. He produced a pistol with a suppressor. It looked huge in his hand. "The senator wants the necklace." Elena froze. The necklace? Why would they send a hitman for a necklace? It was insured. Julian had millions in jewelry. Why chase her to the end of the world for the yellow diamond? Unless... Her mind flashed back to the Gala, to Julian's obsession with the piece. "Never take it off, Elena. It's our insurance policy." She had thought he meant financial insurance, but looking at the gun in Kane's hand, she realized it was something else, something far more dangerous. "I don't have it," Elena lied. "I pawned it in Buenos Aires." Kane sighed. "Don't lie to me. My scanner picked up the unique radiation signature of the diamond setting 10 minutes ago. It's in your bag." Radiation signature? What the hell was in this necklace? "Give it to me," Kane said, raising the gun. "And maybe I make this quick." Elena looked around. Stone walls on both sides. No exit behind her. She was trapped. She slowly reached into her bag. Kane tensed, his finger tightening on the trigger. She pulled out the velvet pouch. "Smart girl," Kane said. "Toss it here." Eleanor held the pouch up. Then, with a scream of rage, she hurled it, not at Kane, but over the wall to her right. The wall that overlooked the cliffside dropped to the harbor below. The pouch sailed through the air. Kane's eyes followed the arc. For a split second, professional instinct warred with his orders. The mission was the diamond. The girl was secondary. He lunged toward the wall to see where it landed. That split second was all Elena needed. She didn't run away. She ran at him. She slammed into his side, driving the ceramic knife into his shoulder. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was shocking. Kane grunted, stumbling back. The gun fired, the bullet chipping the stone wall inches from her ear. Elena didn't wait to see if he fell. She scrambled past him, sprinting back toward the main plaza, back towards the crowds. "Help!" she screamed in Spanish. "He's trying to rob me!" Heads turned. A group of local men stepped forward, blocking the alley entrance. Kane, clutching his bleeding shoulder, looked at the crowd, then at Elena, disappearing into the throng. He couldn't shoot a civilian in broad daylight. Not here. He holstered the weapon and faded into the shadows. He had lost the element of surprise. Elena ran until her lungs burned. She didn't stop until she was inside a busy bus terminal. She locked herself in a bathroom stall and collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. She reached into her bra. The velvet pouch was still there, warm against her skin. She had thrown a decoy pouch, one filled with coins she used for laundry. It was a magician's trick. Misdirection. She pulled out the Thorn diamond. It glittered in the harsh fluorescent light of the bus station bathroom. "What are you?" she whispered to the stone. She held it up to her eye, looking through the gem. There, etched faintly on the underside, barely visible through the facets, she saw tiny geometric patterns. Not scratches, data. Julian hadn't just used her as a shield. He had used her as a hard drive. She wasn't just a thief anymore. She was a whistleblower with a target on her back the size of the Pentagon. She put the necklace back. She needed a computer. She needed to know what she was carrying. And then she needed to decide, destroy it, or use it to burn Julian Thorne to the ground once and for all. She walked out of the bathroom. Sophia the backpacker was gone. Elena the Avenger was back. The Southern District Court of New York was a circus. Outside, a sea of protesters held signs reading, "Eat the rich and justice for Silas." Inside, the air conditioning was humming, trying to cool the feverish anticipation of the press, the jury, and the man sitting at the defendant's table. It had been 3 months since the arrest. Julian Thorne looked thinner, his skin pallid from the lack of sunlight, but his arrogance had returned. He sat in a perfectly tailored suit, brought to him by his legal team, and projected an air of bored indifference. He wasn't worried. He had the deal. Senator Corvus had kept his word. The shadow board had arranged things behind the scenes. The judge, the Honorable Thomas Holloway, was an old friend of Corvus from their Yale days. The prosecutor, while aggressive on TV, had been quietly incentivized to fumble the cross-examination. Julian was going to plead guilty to a lesser charge of corporate negligence. He would serve 2 years in a minimum security facility, that had tennis courts. Then he would retire to a non-extradition country with the hidden millions he had stashed in cryptocurrency, money Elena hadn't found. He looked at the gallery. Senator Corvus was there, sitting in the back row, looking like a concerned public servant. He gave Julian a barely perceptible nod. The fix is in, Julian thought. I win. What Julian didn't know was that 3,000 miles away, in a dimly lit server farm in São Paulo, Brazil, Elena was watching the live stream of the trial. She wasn't running anymore. The incident with Cain in Chile had changed her. She realized that as long as Julian had powerful friends, she would never be safe. She couldn't just hide. She had to sever the head of the snake. She sat before a bank of monitors, the Thorn Diamond resting on the desk next to a high-powered laser scanner. She had spent weeks decrypting the data etched into the stone. It wasn't just launch codes. It was a ledger of every bribe, every assassination, and every rigged election funded by Corvus and his associates over the last decade. Julian had kept it as leverage. "You wanted insurance, Julian?" Elena whispered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm about to cash out your policy." She didn't leak the data to the press. The press could be spun. The press could be bought. She leaked it to the only people Corvus feared more than the FBI. She sent the files to the cartel leaders Corvus had double-crossed. She sent the files to the foreign intelligence agencies Corvus had spied on. And finally, she sent the unredacted files on Judge Holloway's offshore accounts directly to the Department of Justice's Internal Affairs Division, spoofing the email so it looked like it came from Julian's personal iPad in the courtroom. In the courtroom, the proceedings were dragging on. "Mr. Thorn," Judge Holloway said, peering over his spectacles, "we are ready to hear your plea." Julian stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, I plead BZZT." Every phone in the courtroom buzzed simultaneously. It was a jarring, dissonant sound. The judge frowned. "Order. Turn off your devices." But the buzzing didn't stop. It was followed by a collective gasp from the press gallery. Reporters were looking at their phones, their eyes wide. Senator Corvus checked his BlackBerry. His face went from calm to grey in the span of a heartbeat. He looked at the message he had just received. It was a forwarded email from Julian. Subject: "If I go down, you all burn." It contained the coordinates of Corvus's illegal arms shipments. Corvus looked up. His eyes locked with Julian's. Julian smiled, confused by the interruption, thinking this was part of the plan. Corvus didn't smile back. The look he gave Julian was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. He tapped his earpiece, whispering 3 words to his chief of staff outside. "Burn the asset." At the same time, a clerk rushed up to the bench and handed Judge Holloway a note. The judge read it. His hands began to shake. The DOJ had just flagged his accounts. He had been compromised, and the email signature said it was Julian Thorn who had leaked it. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Thorn," Judge Holloway said, his voice trembling with rage, "the plea deal is rejected." Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "The plea deal is rejected." Holloway slammed his gavel so hard the wood splintered. "In light of new evidence regarding the extent of your criminal enterprise, this court finds you a flight risk and a danger to national security." "This wasn't the deal," Julian shouted, looking back at Corvus. "Elias, fix this." Corvus stood up. "I have no idea what this man is talking about," he announced loudly to the press. "I hope justice is served swiftly." He turned and walked out. Julian watched him go, the blood draining from his face. "No, no, he's lying. We have a deal." "Sit down, Mr. Thorn," the bailiff barked. Then the screens in the courtroom, the large monitors used for evidence, flickered. The courtroom gasped. The official seal of the court was replaced by a live video feed. It was Eleanor. She was sitting in shadow, her voice modulated, but her face was visible. She looked directly into the camera. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. "Elena!" Julian screamed, lunging toward the screen. The marshals grabbed him, slamming him back into his chair. "You killed my brother because he found a flaw in your system," Elena said calmly. "You thought you were untouchable because you owned the people who make the laws. But you made a mistake. You wrote down your sins." She held up the Thorn diamond. "You told me this was our insurance. You were right. I just sent the encryption keys to the FBI, the CIA, and a few other interested parties. You are currently the most wanted man in the world, Julian. Not by the police, but by the people you betrayed." She leaned closer to the camera. "You have nothing left. No money. No friends. No future. You are going to die in a cage, knowing that a trophy wife put you there." Julian struggled against the marshals, his eyes wild, spit flying from his mouth. "I'll kill you. I'll find you and I'll kill you." "You can't find me," Elena said. "I never existed." The screen went black. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge was shouting for order. The press was screaming questions. Julian Thorn slumped in his chair. He looked at the empty doorway where Corvus had left. He realized, with a terrifying clarity, what had just happened. Elena hadn't just framed him. She had turned his allies into his executioners. He wasn't going to a country club prison. He was going to a hole in the ground, and he would be lucky if he survived the night. 6 months later, ADX Florence is the highest security prison in the United States. It houses terrorists, spies, and gang leaders. In cell block H, Julian Thorn sat on a concrete slab. He had aged 20 years. His hair was white. He had not spoken a word since the sentencing. He was serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He spent his days staring at the wall, replaying the Gala in his mind. The moment he looked away. The moment she vanished. The slot in his door slid open. A guard pushed a plastic tray through. "Mail call," the guard grunted. "Although I don't know who'd write to a rat like you." Julian didn't move. "It's postmarked from nowhere," the guard muttered, tossing a small envelope onto the floor. Julian waited for the guard's footsteps to fade. He slowly stood up and picked up the envelope. It was heavy. He tore it open. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of a cliffside in Patagonia, overlooking a blue ocean. It was beautiful. Taped to the back of the photo was a small, glittering object. Julian peeled it off. It was a piece of glass, a cheap, cubic zirconia fragment. Written on the back of the photo, in elegant, cursive handwriting, were 3 words. It was fake. Julian stared at the words. The diamond she had thrown into the ocean? The diamond she had shown on the screen? She had switched the real diamond with a fake one years ago. The data she leaked. She must have copied it from his computer manually. The diamond itself, the $12 million stone, she had probably sold months ago to fund her new life. He had chased a piece of glass. He had destroyed his life for a decoy. Julian Thorn started to laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound that echoed off the concrete walls. He laughed until his ribs ached. He laughed until he was crying. He curled up on the floor, clutching the piece of cheap glass, laughing into the dark. Somewhere in the world, a woman with a new name and a new face walked into a sunlit art gallery. She wore no jewelry. She needed none. She was free. And that is how the perfect couple of New York City ended in ruins. Julian Thorne, the man who thought he could control everything, learned the hard way that the most dangerous thing in the world is a woman who has nothing left to lose. Elena didn't just escape a toxic marriage, she dismantled an empire brick by brick, proving that true power isn't about money or status, it's about patience. This story forces us to ask, how well do we really know the people sleeping next to us? Was Eleanor a villain for what she did, or was she the ultimate hero of her own story? If you enjoyed this roller coaster of revenge, betrayal, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Comment below. Would you have thrown the diamond away or kept the money? Let's discuss in the comments.